Rosa Parks from Black Film and TV. Hello, how's it going?
Hi, nice to meet you.
So, the thing about a documentary, and there's always more documentaries than films and so forth, is the MVP is always the editor, how to put it together. And, so that way when you're watching it, you're not getting bored, you're not saying, how long is this?
Right.
Have this extraordinary story about this extraordinary lady, talk to me about putting this together and then highlighting what you wanted to get across.
So we were very fortunate that we got to work with this amazing editor, Cinque Northern. As you are pointing out, he was the real MVP. We had all of these ideas, we had all these stories, and we would, and the we being me, myself, and then also the directors, Betsy West and Julie Cohen. We were all writing and building scripts and giving Cinque a bunch of material. And then he had to make magic out of it, right? He had to make it into a compelling story. And we were really fortunate and that Pauli Murray left this extensive archive that we could use really as the foundation of our storytelling and of the film itself. And so we had letters to pull from and diary entries and so many interviews and recordings that Pauli had made that we really knew that we wanted that to be a huge component of the film. We did not just want this to be a list of accomplishments. We really wanted to get at Pauli's personal life as well. And so because Pauli left so many of those intimate documents, we really were able to tell a multidimensional story, to get at really the nuances of Pauli as a person.
You have the documents that she left, and then there's the research. How long did it take to put this together after you talked to people, watch videos and read the stuff that she's written?
So we started working on this film in 2018.
Okay.
And so it was a long journey, and we were doing everything simultaneously. So we started by going to the archives. That took several trips ultimately, as you could imagine. It was a very, there's a lot of material to go through. So we went through the archives just to get the lay of the land. And then we started interviewing people. We brought in an editor and started building the story, but everything really was happening at the same time. And so we were editing while we were still filming interviews and filming scenes, and also still going back to the archive to get more material. I will say one of the last things that we really figured out how to put together was the relationship between Pauli and Rini Barlow, which was so loving. We knew from talking to people and reading the books that it was that Rini's relationship with Pauli was so important, but we did not know how we were going to tell that story. And it's one of the last scenes that we really worked on because we weren't quite sure what to do. And on my last trip to Schlesinger Library, where the archives are held, I just pulled everything that had Rini's name on it and ended up finding all of these love letters that we did not know existed. And that's how we were really able to show the bond between the two of them. So it was really just, I always say this project was a leap of faith. We didn't quite know we didn't know everything we would have to tell this story, but we just embarked on this journey, trusting that we would be able to execute.
You mentioned 2018 is when you started it. So at that point in time, obviously a lot has gone on in the world in which you can use words like binary and other words that are more common now, where right. 10 years ago, who knows if you could have done this story? Who knows if you could have focused in on certain aspect of it? Knowing that the world has changed and is continuing to change, did that give you more freedom, or did that present challenges as far as how much you wanted to tell of a story that's now more acceptable?
Well, for us, I don't know. That's hard to say. I don't know that we would have shied away from telling the story of Pauli being gender nonconforming. I think mainly we were curious and sort of unsure of how we would get at that part of Pauli's life, because there just wasn't a lot out there from Pauli directly about that. And so it's not something that Pauli spoke about in published writings. Pauli did not write about this in the final autobiography. And so that too was something that once we went to the archives and we saw that Pauli kept so many records. Pauli saved the letters to doctors saying, can I get testosterone treatment? And looking for other avenues for gender confirmation, for various medical interventions that would affirm Pauli's gender identity. And once we saw those elements and we saw that Pauli had saved some writings about it and other things, we knew we had those materials. So really we were driven by Pauli's own, record, essentially.
Why do you think her story hasn't been told? And, obviously, this documentary is the first I've heard of her, but she could be known in other circles, but not to a mass audience.
Right.
So
Pauli is, right. We do like to acknowledge we are not the first. We did not discover Pauli Murray, right? There are lots of communities who have been singing Pauli's praises for years, and we have added on to that avalanche, of recognition. I think it's hard to say why Pauli has not been recognized. Obviously, racism plays a role. Sexism plays a role. Pauli was not open about being gender nonconforming, but Pauli also didn't hide it per se. And so one could easily imagine that there are a lot of people who did not associate or embrace Pauli because Pauli was non-binary, what we now would call non-binary. And then Pauli was also ahead of the times in so many ways. Pauli would focus on an issue, and by the time there was a movement to really focus on that issue, Pauli had moved on to the next thing. And so if you're not a part of the movement when it is happening, it is harder to get that recognition.
And then, whenever you talk about any story, anybody's life, whether it's a fiction or documentary, there's always nowadays, at least through social media, how much involvement is the family? Did they approve? Did you, because obviously when the family's not involved, then there's all sorts of reasons because you don't want to sanitize a story if the family's involved. Oh, we can't tell that. So, so how much was the family involvement in this? And did you leave anything out?
So we left things out, not because of any sort of familial influence, just because, in the telling a 90-minute story, you can't include everything when you are dealing with a person as rich and as as successful as Pauli Murray, right? Pauli Murray did so many things. There was no way we could tell all of those things. But in terms of the family, I should say that the family is not a monolith. So it's not like, I don't think that everyone in Pauli Murray's family even has the same view of Pauli Murray or would have pushed for the same things to be told in a story about Pauli Murray. But we did work closely, specifically with Pauli's grandniece, Karen Ross, who is the executrix of Pauli's estate. And so we reached out to her very early on in the process to collaborate with her. And she was a key partner for us as we made the film. And that is not to say, I think that I should say we had her support, but we weren't necessarily taking her direction, as we were able to, communicate with her about what it is we were able to achieve. And she seemed supportive of that, but we did have the freedom to tell the story as we saw fit.
And before I let you go, as a producer, what do you want people to take away from this? And could you turn this into a feature film? Because we saw what the Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary did. And, obviously they made a film, not based on that documentary, but eventually they made a film. Obviously Pauli has enough material for a feature film. Could you get on board to that? Since you've got all this material, no one knows it more better than you, since you've been working on this for a long time. Would you, spearhead a feature film?
Feature film.
Let's talk about what you want audience to get out of it first.
So I would say, there's just so much to take from Pauli's story, but to me, I think Pauli is so inspiring, right? That Pauli, if you watch the film, you'll see that we did not shy away from actually a lot of losses that Pauli experienced. Pauli pushed for change and often was not successful in those moments. It would take a while for an idea that Pauli was advocating for to actually play out and come into fruition in society. And I think at a time like this, when there are so many people pushing for us to have in this country a more inclusive society, that it really is important to take the long view and to understand when you are pushing for change, it may not happen immediately, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And Pauli really was able to keep that long view and to keep pushing even in the face of adversity. So I think for me, that's really, Pauli is a role model in that way, especially right now. And in terms of something scripted, I'm a person who thinks Pauli should have all the things. We tell so many different, there have been so many different versions of Winston Churchill's story, Martin Luther King's story, John F. Kennedy's story. And I think Pauli should have that same treatment. And so, yes, I definitely think there should be a scripted feature. I think there should be a multi-part series. I think people should do plays. There should be more books. There's just so much to mine from Pauli's life. And so I want people to make all the things.
You know, the scary thing about it is that when it comes to Black biopics, you only get one shot of it. You know what I'm saying? You know, you only get one shot, you know,
Yes.
unless it's Martin Luther King, you can bring it up different times.
Right.
You get one shot at Harriet. You got one shot at Aretha. You know what I'm saying? Now you can do two, feature and TV, but if you're going to do feature, you get one shot at the title, you know, because it's like you don't see it. So if you're going to, you know, do that feature film, you got to get it right, because it's sort of like, otherwise, if anybody ever thinks about doing it again, it's only because they didn't think the first one did justice.
Right.
So, you know, and before I let you go, your very last question, what are you doing next?
I mean, that I am now, I produce as well as direct. And so I have a documentary that just came out that I directed on families who are losing their homes because of climate change. And it premiered on HBO Max recently. It's called Through Our Eyes. And that episode is called Uprooted. And then past that, I'm looking for additional projects.
Well, hopefully we'll talk later on, because you're in the game one way or the other. So keep it going. Thanks a lot, and take care.
Thanks. It was nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.